Hi, everyone. Thanks, Eric. Fantastic to be here. Love Hong Kong. This is going to take two parts. First is a kind of overview of the practice and some of our greatest hits, and then second, I'm going to dive into some projects that are responsible for giving the lecture its title, Democracity. Liz and Rick, my partners, started the firm in 1982 at a time when there wasn't a lot of great building going on. There was a lot of corporate architecture. And as such, they started working in the art world. And so no project is too small for us, and no idea is limited by the size of its realization. Here, Vice Virtue drinking glasses in which we interrogated the essence of a drinking glass and the idea of virtuous behavior as associated with water, which always has a flip side. And then we've done product design. This is a light that we did for Swarovski. You can measure out and weigh your own size sack with crystals. We're always interrogating the typologies in which we find ourselves working, and we're always trying to deliver new kinds of experiences to the audiences in which we deliver them. So, for instance, in the theater, in which we've done quite a bit of work, we challenge the convention of a single viewing stage set. Here, with a 45-degree Mylar mirror over the stage, the audience is delivered both a perspectival and a planimetric view of a performance, doubling one's pleasure for the price of one ticket. The Broad Museum, as Eric mentioned, in LA, I'm not really going to talk very much about it, but it was very much about bringing the public from the city into a museum and choreographing a kind of experience which takes one through the archive. The Berkeley Art Museum is an adaptive reuse of an old printing press in Berkeley, California. But we also turned the building inside out, providing lots of ways to see in and engaging the city free of charge. This is the Vagelos Center at Columbia University. It's a medical education building that we finished just a year and a half ago, where we privileged all the the informal student spaces by collecting them all on one side of the building and linking them with a stair that's grown right from the sidewalk. Many of our projects do, in fact, emanate from the DNA of the city and spaces around them. Here at Lincoln Center, we were asked to renovate this venerable New York institution, which had fallen on hard times, a reflective of a city that had changed from the time of its making, in which white flight was the dominant predilection for urban city dwellers. And here we turned the institution inside out. An extension of the Juilliard School reveals that, where we took the stone base off and made the interior of the building quite present on the city streets of New York. And that's the Juilliard School. And then an update to that is that we are doing the Juilliard campus in Tianjin, China. It's well under construction. And here, we're trying to make a new kind of public institution for China that acknowledges its cold climate and a little bit of its pollution by making a kind of indoor-outdoor public space and revealing all of the education spaces on a series of 5 bridges. Every single practice room and every single classroom is revealed to passersby, public, and students and faculty alike through these bridges. And this is Juilliard School about 4 months ago. It's, as projects are in China, being built quite quickly and should be open yesterday. In 2002, this is a kind of bridge project that links a kind of public interrogation through art projects to the architecture projects that I'm going to dwell more on later in this talk. 2002, the Blur Building, which was designed for Swiss Expo 2002, we were asked to design a media pavilion. We had become known as the sort of media darlings of the architecture world, using technology and video and surveillance. And so instead of doing that, we decided we would make our media pavilion be anti-technology. And so what we decided to do was to amass 33,000 fog nozzles, this kind that you would see on lettuce leaves in the supermarket, and put them on a structure the size of a football field, tensegrity structure, and essentially make a cloud. A cloud is something that there's a lot of in Switzerland. So we were sort of representing their own site back to them in several different ways. One with the water making an architecture of atmosphere, shapeless, formless, tasteless, smellless, that one could inhabit. And so actually it is in fact working as a piece of architecture, although the function is one of pure experience and not any kind of other program. And when you get up to the surface that you could walk on, there's nothing to see and nothing to do. This is a theme of our work is, in fact, delivering nothing. You'll see that recurring in a few of these projects. We knew that we had succeeded by finding ourselves on a chocolate bar in Switzerland. And then moving on a couple of years after that, we were asked to, oh goodness, that was supposed to be a video, but it doesn't matter. Think about the future, the Art Museum of the 21st century when we were given the commission to design the ICA in Boston. This was Boston's first museum in 100 years. And we were trying to understand what it meant to be a civic citizen as a piece of architecture in the city. Something bold that cries for attention or something that is a little bit more demure. And we decided that that dichotomy was a false dichotomy and that, in fact, a museum in the 21st century had to do a little bit of all of that, all at once. We had this amazing site on the Boston Harbor. And in fact, the site became the problem of the project. How do you make a museum which is typically for introspection and looking and being within an environment full of art when you've got this amazing view which demands so much attention? And so the building became an apparatus for looking. This is another theme that plays out in our work a lot, is looking at looking. So the view itself had to be edited, pixelated, blurred, and framed. The building is built from the site itself, much like the Blur building. We took the boardwalk, which was mandated by the city of Boston to make the lower few floors, and pulled them up and wrapped them around each other, wove the public through the building. It is a private museum that we wanted to give back to the city public parts of. And so we made this new public plaza, which has become one of Boston's most cherished public spaces. And the theater itself also frames views of the city. And here is that public plaza in use with a theater behind it. So things can be seen from outside, and people can gather underneath the cantilever, which has the art gallery itself, quite a simple space that can be reconfigured at will very easily. And this very fuzzy video shows this special space called the Mediatek. And here, we were showcasing the ICA's media collection, but we wanted to do so in a room which took all of the surrounding visual distraction away. So that's actually just the site itself framed by the architecture. So the building itself is a kind of viewing apparatus, and the framed image of the water became a kind of holding of the museum. The site itself became part of the collection of the museum. And then here, Rio de Janeiro, probably one of the most democratic surfaces in all of the world that collects young, old, fat, skinny, gay, straight, male, female, trans people, and in one place. We won a competition to do a new museum right on Copacabana Beach, right atop that very famous Burle Marx landscaped sidewalk. And we decided that because the building is dedicated to the arts of Rio and Brazil, and artists based in Rio and Brazil, that we would actually make the building out of the city itself. So we took the sidewalk and bent it on top of itself, and at every fold, we position a gallery. And that is the museum. You can see it's a kind of extension of the sidewalk, extension of the beach, and it welcomes visitors to clamber up its facade, free of charge. Essentially, the beach vertically run in a city where the vertical surfaces are usually the domain of the poor. Here we've given them over back to the city for a ticket-free experience to arrive at a kind of public park that we've put on the top of the building, which includes a cinema and a lawn, actually. Now here too, like the ICA, the view is itself a problem. Although it's a spectacular view, you really wouldn't want the view to be the only thing people go up into the museum to see. So we are using the building again as a device, a viewing device, and took the most famous, probably the most famous urban beach view in the world, and used the building as an editing mechanism, and came up with a physical way to frame the view using thousands of parallel cylinders which form the facade of the building and change their angle as one moves up the building from gallery to gallery. One's view of the city is edited, going from sidewalk to road to sand to water to horizon to mountain and then to sky. And this is the building, which has been 90% constructed for about 4 years now, and has been caught up in Brazil's turmoil. We do believe that it will be finished next year. You can see the cylinders that form the facade here, actually giving the facade great texture. That is the state of the building currently. It's quite wonderful to be there. And the backside, which has all of the service bits of the building on it, providing a wonderful place to showcase Carmen Miranda's lips and her eyes. Moving on to one of our best-known projects, the High Line, and I'm going to slow down a little bit. I think I have 18 more minutes. I've done a good job of keeping it brisk. 1.5 miles of abandoned railway on the far west side of Manhattan was this incredible accidental park. And anybody who lived in Manhattan before it was converted into an actual park and went up there understood the potential of this place to provide a new kind of view, a new kind of engagement with the city. And we, with Field Operations and Pete Udolph, won the competition mostly because we let the existing ruin of this industrial park speak to us, give us all of the DNA of our new design. And you see a recurring theme here that most of our new work is actually just drawn out simply from the places that we find. Here are the cracks in the concrete and the green, the gray and the green mixing together in this kind of fecund way where nature always overtakes the built environment in some way, reassuringly, so let's hope that continues. We developed a planking system with tapered concrete planks that would allow the grass to grow through, and it would allow us to make a pattern that would let people flow seamlessly without curbs and without definition, making, ironically, in this very skinny linear park, a kind of fluid method of moving through the park. And we were also very, very interested in the fluid kind of use of the park by a fluid set of people who might want to use the park, where most public parks in cities are dedicated to leisure and prescribed activity. We wanted this park to be open to all kinds of behavior, whether benign or nefarious. And the park, as many of you probably know, this was in the opening year, has become quite heavily trafficked and quite overgrown. Here you see it in its fledgling years, but still sort of occupying its space 30 feet above the streets of New York, giving it a kind of vantage point that no other public space in New York City or in very few other cities have. We do like to think about most of our work as interrogating the space in which it is made, both the physical side and the typological condition. And to take advantage of the existing conditions, here there was a giant girder that spanned 10th Avenue that we built a kind of informal theater down to look at 10th Avenue through a proscenium, which let you see nothing. Again, the theme of nothing but traffic. But in fact, it framed the city out in such a way that you start to think of the city as a kind of player in your quotidian sort of cinema. People have started to take up their own sort of performance practices on the High Line, including what you might expect in a theater and what you might not expect in some of the buildings that the High Line passes through. This is the Standard Hotel. And so right after it was made, there were lots of interesting things that were going on, supposedly encouraged by the owner of the hotel. And we were so excited about that we decided to, in fact, fashion an opera on the things that were, in fact, going on around the High Line, right in front of us. People taking over the streets, singing cabaret or doing whatever they were doing in hotel rooms. The Mile Long Opera premiered just about a month ago. It was an opera for 1,000 singers that stretched from end to end of the entire High Line, 1.5 miles, that visitors would traverse at their own speed and passing by singers, both groups of singers and individual singers, where a narrative about the changing city, the changing nature of the city, was woven together with the actual vantage point of being on the High Line, to see that very city that was being spoken about and sung about, to make a new kind of intimate spectacle, the likes of which I hadn't seen before. And because this is the business of design, we can't talk about the High Line without speaking about its success. It was designed for 365,000 visitors a year back when we started designing in the early 2000s, but it receives over 7 million visitors a year, and the numbers are in front of you. Billions of dollars of investment, many new jobs, hotel rooms, residential units, et cetera. It's been a huge success. It's also been an armature upon which culture has hung itself. The Whitney Museum, as you probably know, anchors the southern end, and we are working on a new project called The Shed, which will anchor its northern edge. Inspired by the industrial site that it finds itself on, the old rail yards for the Metropolitan Transit Authority, and given the brief by the city of New York to make a new kind of culture institution that would be a culture institution for the 21st century, and would keep New York on the map culturally. We were asked what we thought it needed to be, and we said, well, it needs to do everything with equal ease and with equal speed. And so this little video will show you the concept, how the Shed was conceived. That's the rail yards. A new deck that covers the rail yards is the base for a fixed building with 4 stories, and 3 of which can be converted from gallery to performance space. They're column-free, 16,000 square feet each. And then surrounding that building is a kind of veil, or the Shed, which is a moving building along the lines of the Cape Canaveral rocket launcher that moves on rails out 125 feet and makes a cubic volume that can house easily dance, visual art, performing art, music, pop, cinema, and just general spectacle, city spectacle. It has guillotine doors that open it up to the plaza beyond. It can receive trucks on it. It's essentially like a fly tower of a theater with rigging points in its top that can come down. You can see the theater being made on the 3rd floor, kind of exhibition being prepared on the 1st floor, and a kind of spectacular art installation going into the shed itself. The shed it can be heated, it can be cooled, it can be darkened down, it can be acoustically dampened to do anything pretty much at any time. When you merge the two spaces up, it's 32,000 square feet, 3,200 square meters of contiguous space. Here is the shed being darkened down to show cinema or various other kinds of performance and cultural activity. The future of culture is unknown and unknowable, and to make a culture facility that tries to do everything, or that tries to do one thing perfectly well, actually shortchanges the other things. And so what we're trying to do is make a new kind of building which attempts to do all of it equally well and has a kind of character on top of that, because a lot of times spaces that are convertible and transformable are in fact quite generic in nature. And here we were very interested in making a space that had a great deal of character. The shed retracts with 4 motors. I think it's 4, it might be 6. But the power requirement is about the same as that would move an electric car. And so not very much at all, power at all is required. Anyway, you get the idea. And this looking into the main space of spectacle with various doors that move up and down. And clearly, we were inspired by Cedric Price and the Fun Palace and many other, Piano and Rogers at the Pompidou, architectures that were built to anticipate future freedom of occupation and build out. And we have it in our system, and we're trying to get it out, and hopefully this will work. Here you see the rigging points. The air conditioning is actually pumped through the steel skeleton. So the steel itself is the infrastructure of the building. You see the lighting rig coming down in a show. And sorry, this is a very long video. Anyway, you get the idea. I'm going to move ahead. And just some stills from inside the shed proper. And then at the transformation at nighttime with thousands of people in standing room, plus the kind of balcony space beyond. And here it is. It's thoroughly under construction. We're going to open in April, and so they're saying. Here it is, moving in Hudson Yards. This is before it received its cover. Its cover is ETFE, which is vinyl pillows that do a great deal towards insulating the space, both for temperature differences and sound. Those are the wheels. They're 2 meters in diameter. And that's the real speed it actually moves in, although it's sped up. It was a half speed of movement. And just some stills. Okay, and the last project I'm going to speak about today, and something I'm quite proud of, is our park Zaryadye in Moscow, Russia. Sort of building on the success of the High Line, of taking space that was previously private or abandoned, industrial, and giving it back to the public. Zaryadye marks a major milestone for an important city in delivering back private territory to the public. The site used to be the Hotel Rossiya, which was a 3,000-room hotel that the Soviet Union had made for all of its visitors, pretty much. So it was a site that was privatized by the Soviet Union. That building had been abandoned for a number of years and was finally demolished in 2006, and the site languished there for quite some time until the city government, led by Sergei Kuznetsov, the chief architect of Moscow, convinced the higher-ups in the federal government, we know who I'm talking about, to say that it was okay to turn this into a park, and held a international competition of which we were the only American firm to make it into the final round, and we thought quite impossible to win. But somehow we did. Most of the other firms were European, but also Turnscape, Chinese firm, was in the final list. Our idea was pretty simple, was to reintroduce Russian landscapes, the ones that you would find around Moscow and further north and further south, into the city center proper, making a kind of new form of juxtaposition that we called wild urbanism. The idea was to sample these 4 iconic landscapes that you would find throughout Russia, and also in Russian literature that is very much in the kind of memory, the future memory and the past memory of Russians, and bring those landscapes to the site, which itself slopes from northeast to southwest, to array those landscapes according to how they would find themselves in nature relative to each other on that sloped surface. And then to bring, we worked with Hargraves Jones Associates and Arteza, a local Moscow firm, to bring the sort of ecological systems from those different landscapes to the park. And hopefully have them thrive quite naturally in this environment, which is very pleasing to these plants. Each landscape is pulled over its adjacent lower landscape, and at each intersection, at each node, a fairly major piece of architecture was tucked into the landscape. So in fact, we saved the park from architecture, a little bit like on the High Line, we saved it from architecture too. Given that Moscow is a very cold climate, we were interested in using those overlaid areas to make climate modifications through passive and active means, mostly through capturing sunlight and pumping in radiant heat. But our most significant feature, which is a glass dome over the Philharmonic Hall, actually captures heat in the winter months and stores it simply from heat rising into a kind of greenhouse condition that allows the park to be used year-round. That was our competition entry, and this is the park that opened about a year ago, just going to run through some slides and just some reaction. So that is that moment of wild urbanism, birch forest brought from outside of Moscow right into the city center, to the heart of a kind of cold, hard, urban, but beautiful, iconic fairy tale land of Moscow. For the first time, Muscovites were allowed to wander through the green on a pathless kind of network of paving. Most of the parks in Moscow are very delineated. They demand that you stay on the path. There are curbs, there are fences. Gorky Park has undergone a fairly recent renovation, which allows a couple of places to be occupied. But our park was intentionally very porous, with entry points all around the site. There are no fences whatsoever. This is one of the nodal points with the glass skylight system that allows the sun to shine in, protects the space from snow and ice, and that's the cover over the hill that covers the Philharmonic Hall. There's an amphitheater that seats several thousand people there, and you can see one of the other nodal points in the front here. That's a natural history museum. This is what we call the crust over the Philharmonic Hall at night. And the idea was that you could go up here year-round. The the skylights open during the summer months, allowing a natural ventilation. Grass can grow underneath the crust. And then when you get to the very top, you can look back and see all of the monuments of central Moscow. It's Moscow Lost and Found. And the other major feature of the park is this flyover bridge, a kind of bridge to nowhere, which took people out over the Moscow River. Was met with much skepticism. Why would you build a bridge to nowhere? And we said because people will flock to it, which in fact they've done. It's perhaps the most visited location in central Moscow. Cantilevers 25 meters from 2 concrete pylons, and has become the selfie center of the entire city. Here you see our first winter, which was last winter, which you can see the snow outside of the dome and the green grass on the top, sort of proving our position that you could in fact make a place that's occupiable year-round. Here's the overlook, and you can see that in the first month we had over 1 million visitors. This was at the World Cup last summer. There was probably 1 million visitors right there. And it was voted to the world's greatest places in 2018. And more excitingly, I suppose, is another kind of position that it's come to hold. And you can see a theme here from the High Line, that the park has become a place for people to act out in self-expression and love. I think what better reward? A critic could not give you a better kind of critique than this, although it did make it to a stamp. And just to talk about, just in closing, there was a lot of concern that Americans were doing the park here, but just remember that 60% of central Moscow was built by foreigners, and I think the success of the park is due in no small part to the fact that we had a consortium of people, worldwide practices came together, all bound by a common interest in making a great new public space that didn't exist before. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles. That was very fascinating. I also like to note that Diller Scofidio, before you joined, was also very well known for the arts and for really inhabiting the space of the museum. So it's things like Parasite, which was inhabiting MoMA. And as you joined and as you became a partner, more and more of the work has started to be coming towards building. But now with something like Mile Long Opera, it's also becoming a little bit more than building, where it's re-inhabiting the arts into something that you've built. And I'm just wondering what that juxtaposition is between how the arts plays out and being the one who occupies the museum into MoMA versus the one who's designing the museum, the Broad, versus the one who's occupying and designing like the Mile Long Opera along the High Line. Is there a lot of process that goes into thinking about how it's occupied or what is changing? I mean, we can see it with the shed, but into the other projects as well.
Yeah, I mean, we like to say that we work on both sides of the wall as artists coming in and as architects building the envelope that contains the artwork. And so we try to understand both points of view simultaneously. And I think the thing that links many of our projects as we think of them as durational art experiences. I mean, the ICA, even the way that it works as a way to frame out the site and views. The High Line, of course, is a linear kind of cinematic experience. The Broad Museum with its escalator and with its tour of the archive space, again, very much about this kind of theatrical experience of space through time that turns almost any public experience into one of kind of a theatrical experience.
And we can take a few questions from the audience as well. Can I open up the questions from the audience? I'm not paused, just usually I rush too fast, I feel. So there's one here.
Hi, Charles. We met last night. How are you?
Yes, good to see you.
Really enjoyed the presentation. I would like to ask a question. How is the process when designing the public spaces and the engagement, the experience, how do you approach that experience? What that engagement, do you have engagement in mind before you start? And how does it develop over the course of the project? And of course, what's the reality of it? And how do you maybe use that data to then be influenced for another project?
So just to talk about the High Line, for instance, we certainly did meet with community boards and residents from around the High Line, but we were also careful to balance out what we think of was a pure experience that we wanted to bring. Had we listened to all of the community boards, we would have been designing dog parks and playgrounds, which is fine, don't get me wrong. However, we thought that might have squandered the potential of the site. And so it's important for us to hear the voices of the public ahead of time. But it's also important for our voice or voices of people we collaborate with who are sort of experts in this work to allow those to emerge and hopefully bring a completely new experience, a new kind of design that the public couldn't imagine before it's executed. So there's a balancing act, of course, that needs to happen.
What do you think about the role of risk? I mean, just thinking about also the shed as a project, it hasn't been done before, and often so many of the projects that Diller Scofidio has done and Renfro has done have never been done before. I mean, the blur as a cloud, there's a lot of risk involved. Where does the idea of risk come into play, both as challenging yourself in a way and knowing that you're the first that may succeed or fail, but also risk in terms of how it might be for the city?
Sure. I mean, let's talk about Blur. It was a temporary pavilion, and it was really scary. I mean, I was not a partner at that time, but I was the head, the project manager on that project, and we couldn't figure out how to make it work up until the very end. And so we were terrified that it would be, egg on our face, and it was being followed by the New York Times and all of this kind of stuff. But somehow, out of sheer will and elbow grease, we made it happen. But sort of knowing that it was temporary was sort of a little bit of a help, I suppose. With the shed, I think there's just enough known. Column-free conditioned space, pretty simple stuff. A spectacular big space. I think that's going to be, that's in itself sort of known a little bit. What's not known is the kind of the movement between those two and how that will be used. And so even, that part in itself is a little risky, but we also know that the building is going to do a lot of things that we already know how to do, and it's going to do them well. Yeah. So it's a sort of risk mitigation.
In the shed, the risk I was thinking about wasn't exactly the mechanics of it.
Yes.
It's actually the curatorial side. And I know they have an amazing person who's actually the director of it, who really has a vision. And I think that's also important, that as we saw today, too, with Lars and with Herzog de Meuron, it isn't just the side of the architecture or just the side of the client or the curator or the museum director. It's actually working together. Has there been a lot of dialogue with the director?
Absolutely, yes, because when we first came into this, we had imagined it to be completely flexible as it is, but I think what Alex Poots, the director, brought is a great deal of attention to the performing art side of things, and he has rightfully identified a kind of trend in arts production towards time-based visual work. I think that's all partly due to our smartphones, where we, nobody looks at a still image anymore. People are constantly videoing and looking at video. And so he pushed the mechanics of the building into something that would accommodate performance and film a bit more. On the other hand, it is able to do traditional, accommodate traditional kinds of program pretty easily.
Are there other questions that we can take? Perhaps one last question? If not, I would just like to say, too, that the audience in your projects always are pulled in. I mean, I always feel that it's almost no mistake that the hotel along the High Line becomes a site of exhibitionism, or that people actually do spontaneously seemingly get married on the High Line, get married in Moscow, and that there is something that's very theatrical about the element that makes you actually question yourself in the role of the rest of the audience. You become putting and willing to put yourself on stage. And I think there's something very nice about the architecture. It isn't a site of theater, but it actually evokes the idea that, too, we all are participants in sort of like the Brechtian theater of life. We're all participants in this.
Right.
So thank you very
Absolutely.
much. Greatly
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.